Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for the Grant Wood Lecture. Before we get started, my name is Kimberly Dachik, and I am the Curator of Learning and Engagement here at the Stanley Museum of Art. Please join me for a moment as I read the University of Iowa Acknowledgement of Land and Sovereignty. The University of Iowa is located on the homelands of the Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Bahoji, Iowa, Chickapew, Kickapoo, Ametmaneowak, Menominee, Miamaka, Miami, Natuchi, Missouri, Omaha, Omaha, Wazaji, Osage, Jiware, Oto, Ottawa, Ottawa, Ponca, Ponca, Potawatomi, Neshnabay, Potawatomi, Meskwaki, Nemetmawaki, Sakawaki, Sac and Fox, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, Sioux, Sanish, Nobaka, Nueta, 3 affiliated tribes, and Ho-Chunk, Winnebago nations. The following tribal nations: Omaha, Omaha tribe of Nebraska and Iowa, Ponca, Ponca tribe of Nebraska, Meskwaki, Sac and Fox of the Mississippi and Iowa, and Ho-Chunk, Winnebago tribe of Nebraska nations, continue to thrive in the state of Iowa, and we continue to acknowledge them. As an academic institution, it is our responsibility to acknowledge the sovereignty and the traditional territories of these tribal nations, and the treaties that were used to remove these tribal nations, and the histories of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution since 1847. Consistent with the university's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, understanding the historical and current experiences of Native peoples will help inform the work we do, collectively as a university, to engage in building relationships through academic scholarship, collaborative partnerships, community service, enrollment and retention efforts, acknowledging our past, our present, and future Native nations. And now I'm happy that we have TJ Dido Norris here to introduce Michael Dixon properly.
Hello everyone, welcome. So short, we'll just do it. Associate Professor here at the University of Iowa and proud Grant Wood Fellow alumni 2016-17. On behalf of myself and our school and our students and community, I'd like to thank Jim Hayes, founder of the Grant Wood Fellowship, for being so generous and committed to preserving Grant Wood's legacy here. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce our current Grant Wood Fellow. Michael Dixon is an oil painter born in San Diego, California. He received his master's degree at the University of Colorado Boulder in painting and a bachelor's of art in painting at Arizona State University. Dixon is currently a full professor of art at Albion College. He's been the recipient of numerous awards and grants, including the Pollock Krasner Foundation, Joan Mitchell Foundation, Puffin Foundation, Blanchard Fellowship, the Phi Beta Kappa Scholarship, of the Year Award. Dixon has received numerous artist residencies, including the Sharp Wollentest Studio Program, Yaddo, Virginia Center for the Arts, the Joan Mitchell Center. His work can be found in the personal collections of artists Nick Cave, Beverly McKeever, and the Petrucci Family Foundation Collection of African Art. Dixon has shown both nationally and internationally at museums, universities, art centers, alternative spaces, and galleries. His imagery explores the personal, societal, and aesthetic struggles of belonging to both white and black racial and cultural identities, yet simultaneously belonging fully to neither. By generously sharing some stories with us today, artist Michael Dixon will be unpacking the demons within, between, and beyond race. Thank you. Come on up here.
All right. Hello, everyone. I just want to thank the Grant Wood Art Colony, Maura Pilcher, Jim Hayes, my fellow, I guess I shouldn't use fellow, the other fellows, Joanna Winters, Kieran Sargent. I want to thank TJ and Laurel in the painting area, the School of Art and Art History, and the Stanley Museum of Art. It's been a great opportunity to be here, and I have a couple students here. Thank you for coming. So I've just had a great time being an artist here in Iowa City, so thank you. So I'm gonna just tell some stories. So it's gonna be about 4 stories. I'm gonna start with a little bit of language so that my partner's always like, you shouldn't say these things, and just, thinking that people know what you're talking about. So I'm gonna just cover a little bit of the topics that I'll go over in my work. I'm going to start off with a little bit, after we go over these terms, I'll start with a little bit about my background, which will be helpful when you're looking at my art. So we'll eventually get to the art. Let's do that. All right, so blackface minstrelsy. This is an American tradition. This is where all the stereotypes about black people come from, or many of them, if not most of them. It's a theatrical production in which white people would dress put black paint on their face and pretend to be black. And eventually, black theater people would do that as well. They would blacken their face with tar and pretend to be white people pretending to be black. So that's something you're going to see in my work. Black Sambo comes out of this tradition. So I'll be clear, this is a racist image of a black person. This imagery is ubiquitous. It was on kids' toys. It was a restaurant. You can still find a lot of this kitsch material in thrift stores and antique stores. I would say the Black Power movement, you probably started to see some of the stuff disappear, but it's very much still visible and in the public psyche. Sambo's just one of many black caricatures that come out of this American tradition. So you're familiar with the Mammy, which it would be the Aunt Jemima logo, Uncle Tom, which would be the Uncle Ben's logo, the Black Brute, Pickaninny, right? So these are all kind of caricatures that some of this imagery will show up in my work, so you know what I'm talking about. Miscegenation is sexual relations between 2 people from 2 different races. So America had anti-miscegenation laws up until Loving versus Virginia, which was 1967, which said you cannot discriminate against people that are in mixed race relationships. So 1967, it's about 56 years ago when it was legal in America to be in a mixed race relationship. So Ferris, that's some of the language I'll be using. Ferris State University, I'll just plug them really quick. They have a Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia. Nowadays, with the interwebs, you could, all of this information is really at your fingertips if you were so inclined to find it. But this museum has a great educational program to find out about lots of these things, this imagery. So that's the terms. Story number 1, the day I found out I was black, otherwise known as the popsicle story. So, this is my mother, Peggy Rumpf. She's a white woman. This is my biological father, Michael Jackson. I do not know Michael, and this is a Michael Jackson, not the Michael Jackson. It could be a different story if it was reversed. This is Joe Dixon. He married my mother when I was about 2 or 3. This is who I call Dad. That's my sister in my mom's belly. It's the house I grew up in. I grew up with my grandmother, and my parents divorced when I was about 6 or 7. So there's a picture of me and my sister. It's me at SeaWorld. I grew up in San Diego. I just like this picture because it's showing me painting at my aunt's daycare, and I became a painter, so I think it's funny. And this is my cousin group. So Debbie is here. She's the oldest of my cousins. This is my sister, and that San Diego hat back there is Debbie's brother. And so it was Debbie and my cousin David and me and my sister. Me and my sister had red popsicles. My cousins had purple popsicles, and I said, "Ah ha ha! You guys are the black people, and we're the Indians, right?" And my eldest cousin Debbie said, "Well, Michael, you're black," and I was like, "No, I'm not." And she's like, "Yeah, you are." And I ran to my mother And I was like, Debbie said I was black. And my mother looked down and said, well, you are black, Michael. And then it was never talked about again. So that was probably about 6 or 7 when that happened. And it was this thing in my life, that I remember to this day. So that's how I found out I was half black. Interestingly enough, I was associating race and color at that time. That's another story for another day. What I'll tell you is that when I found out I was black, I knew that I didn't think that was a good thing. I knew that black was bad, right, at a young age. So most of my work is talking about identity and racial identity. So when I think about racial identity, I think about how we self-identify, how we see ourselves, and how the world reflects that identity back at us. So I would say, as a kid, I self-identified as white. I started going to school. We have the testing that's going on, and they would ask you your race on the standardized testing. I would be very confused. I would put white. Fast forward to high school, my mother remarries my stepdad, and we move out to a community called Yucca Valley, California, a couple hours outside of San Diego, high deserts by Palm Springs, Joshua Tree, if you're familiar with any of those places, very white community. So I am one of a handful of black kids at this high school. My dating pool is white girls. And I went to this community thinking, you know what, I'm not white or black, I'm just gonna be Michael. I start dating, and this is when I start to discover parents, grandparents, don't really like that I'm dating their white daughters and granddaughters, and they let me know about it. A lot of my friends were these kind of white, I had a white cohort of friends. I was the token black friend. They wanted to tell me the latest, greatest black joke. And I just didn't have the language or the vocabulary or the education really to say, that's not cool, and I would just kind of wanted to be a part of the group. So it really wasn't until college, I took my first African American history class where I started to form a positive or I started to see, I've learned about Malcolm X for the first time and these kinds of things. So I started to have positive figures, black figures that I could look up to. And that's really when I started to self-identify as black. So the rub is, depending on how I have my hair, I used to have a very luscious afro that I would grow and cut. So depending on how my hair is, depending on the context in which I find myself, people don't reflect my identity back at me the way I self-identify. So a lot of my work is trying to capture that space of not being white enough, not being black enough, and what does that look like and feel like. So hair for me was one of those things, it was the most ethnic part of my look, my being light complected. So that's kind of where that'll get us kind of started. That's my initial growing up. And I'm going to talk now. Story number 2 is going to be about some of my early influences and some of the process of how I make my work. And my early influences are really kind of helped shape who I was to become in the art world. I was an undergrad in the mid to late 90s, so identity work was really hot at that point. And I was always attracted to artists that were pushing the boundaries. I was attracted, a lot of these artists were controversial. This is Robert Colescott, light-skinned black man, was the first African-American to represent the United States at the Venice Biennale. He taught at University of Arizona in Tucson, and so he would call this his 1-2 punch. The way he's painting is very cartoon-like, but the content is very heavy, so people would come to this work and be like, oh, look at this fun painting, and then as they unpack the work, it smacks you in the face with the content. Kerry James Marshall, at the time, University of Illinois in Chicago was where he taught. He's riffing off Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. His figures are literally black. They're holes in the canvas. huge influence on me as a young painter. Michael Ray Charles, talking about kind of advertising and black bodies and how, and sports and how black bodies are advertised and seen in sport using history. Faith Ringgold, early kind of black feminist. This is from a flag series that she did in the 60s. Die, N-word is in there in the American flag. And then this was Beverly McKeever, one of my undergraduate painting professors. She was the only black professor in undergrad. I was the only black student in the art department. And she was a huge, huge influence on me as a young painter. And so she she wanted to be a clown when she was young, and so this is clown makeup that she's putting on her face. And so you'll see, this is kind of grad school work that I'm showing. And so I too would paint my subjects in whiteface and blackface. The models here are all biracial. They have a black parent and a white parent. And so this was a performance I did in graduate school for my thesis exhibition. Performance is one of the ways I create imagery for my painting. So, and sometimes they're just standalone performances, but oftentimes I would say 98% of my work comes from some kind of performative act that either happens in public or happens in my studio. This particular performance, I had no clothes on underneath that painting suit, which I would come to find out it ripped as I was crawling down the hallway. And so these signs, I had these about 6 4x4 feet pieces of plywood. These were kind of my Oompa Loompa helpers that were helping me out. And so diversity in action, it has a kind of a double meaning. And so I crawled into the museum space, and they cut off these signs, and all of these signs had questions or statements of things that I've heard a gazillion times. What are you? Oh, I didn't know you were black. These kinds of things. Is your hair real? So these are things that I've heard, I just hear all the time as a light-skinned black man. And so I get on I stand up, I'm all dirty, I had this black paint in my mouth, and I was in all white, and I smiled real big, and all the black came out of my mouth, and then I answered the questions. So it was kind of like yes, yes, no, yes, and I kind of did that for a while, and then they carried me off. So this is some more performance work. This is at Penland, where I sometimes teach workshops. So Penland, it's Penland School of Craft, and so I was teaching a workshop called Performance, Process, and Paint. So I did performances with the students, and then you see paintings emerge afterwards. So, all right. Story number 3. My most successful painting ever. So, this story, it happens in Boulder, Colorado. So Boulder, Colorado is a very white space. I arrived in the fall of 2003. There's not a lot of diversity there. And this is my very first semester of graduate school. And so the climate of Boulder, as I would come to find out. I think I was there, it's a 2.5-year program, so I was there for 5 semesters, and there was like 5 or 6 hate crimes in my tenure there. This happened after I made this artwork, but this was the college Republicans were doing a bake sale against affirmative action, and so they would have white students pay $1, they would give it cookies free to black students, and they would, if you were a different ethnicity, they charge you different prices. We don't have to read all this, but this is just a few things of what was going on in the news during my time there. And so the assignment was was talking about the white cube and art outside of the white cube. So in the white space, in the gallery space, there was a map that led to art outside of the white cube. And so that was my map, and this is what I made. It said, "Welcome to Boulder, where there aren't many." This is my first semester, by the way, here. So blacks, Asians, Indians, Mexicans, natives or Arabs, white people enjoy. And I put it out on a fence as a public art piece. And I put it out 3 a.m. A couple of black students see it in the morning, think it's a hate crime. They take it down. They take it over to the, there was a kind of like an office for blacks, for, I don't know. It was like I don't know what it's called, but it's for students of color. And so they take it over there, they call the cops because they think it's a hate crime. Cops come over. That is an elementary school, so the principal of the elementary school gets involved, the principal of the university, or the president of the university gets involved, the cops are there, Channel 4 News is there, I'm sleeping at home, my phone is blowing up, I have like 16, 20 messages, like, you need to get to school, Michael, we're looking for you. And so, I go to school, and someone in that office was like, "There's something over in the art building that looks similar to this. You should check it out." And so they go over there. They find out it's a student of color, and so then I go in front of 200 people the next day, and I explain the artwork. So what happened was, half the people got it, half the people didn't get it. I got yelled at for couple hours, whatever. But then what started happening was people started standing up and speaking their truths. My kid goes to that elementary school. My kid can't even walk across the street to my office without someone saying something to them, saying some racial slur, and then another person stands up and, "This has happened to me," and then another person stood up, "Well, this has happened to me." And so what happened was this dialogue started to happen that really needed to happen. I had no idea about that community because I had just arrived. I was just picking up a vibe that it's not a very diverse place. And so I was just kind of, and I was being tongue-in-cheek and trying to be funny. And so this is Onye Azuzu, who's a dancer. She is also biracial. Her kids went to that school. She saw this and thought it was funny. And so she contacted me later and said, "Hey, I'm working on this dance project. Would you like to collaborate?" So I get out of graduate school, and Onye was working on a dance performance where she was dressing she was painting her body in the colors of Sambo. So this, she came to Phoenix, Arizona, where I was at the time, and she did this performance in front of my house. I lived in an arts district, even though the cops were called, but I took the pictures and I made the paintings after graduate school. And so not only these are the colors of Sambo, the red, white, and black, and it kind of references Sambo, but it also references, which is an American tradition, it also references the colors of an Afro-Caribbean deity called Alegua, whose colors are also black, white, and red. And so that is an African tradition. So the work is kind of talking about, again, being biracial, having both feet in both of those worlds. Alegua is the keeper of the crossroads. And so all of that was kind of packed into this work. I would have an exhibition. She would come and perform several iterations of this, so with the painting. So, and then all of the ephemera from her performance would stay in the space. And so that's what we did on several occasions. So, all right. Story number 4. This is it. We're 75% done. We're almost there. All right, so this is just a little bit of my work. This is not a comprehensive showing of my work, but this is just a few different bodies of work that I've done over the years. Shared histories. This was a project. I lived in Turkey for a summer, for 3 months, and there are black people in Turkey. In case you didn't know, there's black people all over the Middle East. So the Ottoman Empire lasted for 900 years. At the beginning of the Ottoman Empire, there was a slave trade. So there's black people all over the Middle East. And so when the Ottoman Empire fell, Ataturk creates Turkey. And so there is populations of black people in Turkey that have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, generationally. And so I interviewed people that had one black parent and one white parent. And I was interested in how do they see themselves? How is their identity perceived? So, and this is an ongoing project. It's kind of still ongoing. I did this same concept in the United States. I hope to do it in South Africa, Brazil, and maybe France or something, and have about 100 to 120 stories and images, and then make a book. That's my plan. The more things change, the more they stay the same. This was a project that I did. I was at a residency. I was at the Joan Mitchell Center, and I had brought a. No, that's not true. Where was I? I was at a residency. It wasn't the Joe Mitchell Center, but I wasn't planning on making work about, this is when a lot of these police shootings were happening that continue to happen in the news, but there was a moment in the news cycle where this was happening every day. And so I didn't intend to make work about this, but I was at a residency and this is kind of what happened. And so these are images of me. I'm thinking about black bodies and blackness and what that means in America and the value of black bodies in America. And so a lot of titles are important. And so a lot of the titles, not all of them, but a lot of them, especially the longer ones, I was reading a lot of black political thought at the time. And so these are, speeches by W. Du Bois, Frederick Douglass, these kinds of texts, and I was kind of pulling. It was interesting to me that so say like a W. Du Bois in the early 1900s is giving this speech, and it's as if the speech could be given today. Was my impression of the texts, like, oh, this is still going on, you know. So hence the name. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Pickaninny 1976, this is the last body of work I worked on before my most current body of work. And this is really, it's a 3-part, it's one body of work, but in 3 parts. So this is part 1. So my mother's parents are from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. My grandfather was in World War II. And he came back from the war an alcoholic and not functioning. So my grandmother had 6 kids, so he moved back to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and left my grandmother and his 6 kids in California so she could get on welfare. So I didn't know my grandfather, but my mother relays the story that the one time I met him, I was about 2, he said, "Where's that little pickaninny at?" And so that's the little nugget of personal narrative. And so a pickaninny is one of those caricatures that I started with. It's oftentimes, it's a little black child, and a lot of times these children are by themselves, kind of like little feral animals. They're kind of dirty, and so the white humor is, you know, this is a postcard that's, again, ubiquitous, and so this is meant to be funny. So it's a couple of black kids with an alligator, and it says alligator bait, right? And that's the bit of white humor that, and then. Again, this image is very ubiquitous. That's a piece of, that was a logo for a business. And this is, in my research about this, about half of the things I read said that this really happened, that that parents and things would hide their black children because there was white men coming to look for them, and they would use them for alligator bait. The other half of my research said there's not enough empirical evidence to suggest this was a real thing. Whether it was real or not, there's a through line for me. You have that kind of white humor that is creating violence on a black child, and so you have, this is Emmett Till, who was lynched at 14 in 1955. George Stinney Jr., also 14. 1944, he was the youngest person to be electrocuted or put to death in America. And then Tamir Rice is on the bottom, 12 years old, he was playing outside and he was shot by and killed by police. So I think there's very real, this is kind of meant to be funny and humorous and just imagery, but there's real consequences. And so this is the work. These are images of me as a kid, and I lovingly put an alligator in there. And again, thinking about what is this pickaninny imagery? What does that mean for me? My grandfather called me a pickaninny. What did he mean to be funny? What's the implications of that? And so that's what I'm kind of toying with this imagery. And then I had an exhibition at the University of Michigan. So this is I made a big sculpture of an alligator head and put all kinds of little kids' toys and things in there. And so kids would come into the exhibition, and the first thing they wanted to do was crawl into the alligator's mouth. And then I had a couple of videos. So this left video was just this beautiful black baby. And on the right was, I went around to a couple different alligator farms and I recorded alligators being fed. And so you have the audio and the visual of alligators eating. What does that sound like? And then juxtaposed next to that little baby. And then what I'm working on now, so this is going to be part 2 of this body of work. It's called Miscegenation Nation. So these are images of my mother. And I haven't really painted my mother much. And I haven't really talked to her about her story. And so I'm interested in, she's a single white woman with this black kid in 1976. And, Loving versus Virginia was not that far away from that. Did people say things? Did people stare? What were the positives? What were the negatives? So this will be some of the work that I show when I have my exhibition in April. And this is what I've been working on while I'm here. And then the last part of this trilogy is I plan to find my biological father and find him. I don't know, he could be dead or who knows where he's at, but I'm going to attempt to find him and meet him, and then I'll make some work about that. So that'll be the trilogy of work. Thank you. All right, made great time. Thought I had too many slides. So I guess we have questions. If anyone has any questions or comments, you can talk. Yes.
You're a beautiful painter.
Thank you.
And your work reminds me a little bit of Alice Neal.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could talk about that. Like, was she an influence? We're getting, I should mention, the museum is borrowing the Neal portrait, Black Boys, which will be here from the Tia Foundation in 6 weeks. And we're putting it at the entrance point to our inaugural exhibition.
Yeah.
I love Neal's work, and I love that painting in particular. So but anyway, just tell me more about what Neal meant to you.
I love Alice Neal, number one. So, I would say, as a young painter, I was voraciously looking for any figurative work that I could consume. And so she's definitely on that list. I think some of the artists I showed as my primary influences were a little more influential as I was going through, but I love Alice Neal. I love the documentary about Alice Neal. If you haven't seen that, you should see that. So yes, yeah, I love Alice Neal, so definitely in there.
Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. It's lovely.
Thank you.
It's really powerful.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
I missed the beginning of the talk, so let me know if I'm asking you something you already said.
Okay.
But it's really interesting to me that your work is connected to performative events. How did that develop for you? How did that come to be how you make paintings and art?
Yeah, great question. I think when I got out of undergrad, I went to Arizona State, and you know, there really wasn't. I kind of got cranked out, like I think a lot of students do. It was kind of like, thanks for coming. We'll call you, don't call us. And so when I was an undergrad, I was the kind of student that I volunteered a lot. So I was a docent at the Arizona State Art Museum, which put me in contact with artists. And so there would be an artist that was doing an installation, and I would be like, "You need help? I'm there." Like, and I did that a lot. I don't see students doing that much volunteering. I'm looking at you too. So I just volunteered a lot, and so I actually got to see Beverly McKeever make her work, and it was like, oh, that's how you make your images. And so I lifted that from Beverly McKeever directly. We can call her if you want. Gee. And so yeah, so it was kind of like, and I actually didn't. Like I said, I was always attracted. I knew I wanted to be a figurative painter. I knew I wanted to be an oil painter. I was really attracted to work that was pushing people to their limits. And so I was kind of waffling a lot. And it wasn't until my last semester of undergrad that I kind of am making the work that started then. And I was working full-time and going to school full-time, so I was like, just get me the hell out of school. And unfortunately, I didn't appreciate my time in undergrad because I was trying to get out. And so I probably wasn't the best student because of that. But I had signed up for an undergraduate, there's like a BFA exhibition. I had signed up for it. I graduated in the fall, in December. And so I had graduated, I graduated, and then sometime in the spring, someone called me or emailed me and said, your exhibition is going to be in 2 weeks. And I was like, ah! And so I had to rush and make work. So I painted for like 2 weeks straight and made this exhibition. And I made this personal narrative work is what came out. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So, and then seeing how other people make their work is how I picked that up. So, and then I took performance classes in graduate school as well, which led me to just doing standalone performances. So, it's the most scary and the most powerful space I've existed in. So.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Thanks for coming.
Absolutely.
I wanted to know what steps are you taking to try to find your dad? And then I would suggest Ancestry.com. You will find out a lot,
Yeah.
good and bad.
Yeah. So I'm on 23andMe, and I have lots of third and fourth and sixth and 12th cousins on there. I'm going to hire an investigator, I think is what I'll do. And so what happened was he had a kid already, got my mother pregnant. My mother had me when she was 19. And then the woman that he had the first kid with, he got her pregnant again. And so my mom was like, you need to make a decision. And so he ended up going with that lady. And her name is Tiny. And I've actually found her just on like Facebook. TJ and I were talking. And so it was probably 2008. I made some work. I had decided like, I'm going to find this brother. And then I chickened out. So this is like, I'm kind of inching up to the for real. So I've been thinking about it a long time. there's a lot of fear and anxiety or angst around it. So I've been putting it off, but I think I'm 40, I'll be 47 in March. I think I'm ready. So I'm inching towards it slowly.
Do you feel like, kind of in line with the question about that, which is very, very touching actually, to build up that kind of time where you feel like you can find those things out, but you're, like the interviewing you were doing of biracial couples, like all over the world, that was really interesting, and I was wondering, I'm sure it's still processing, but number one, I wonder if that was like a kind of way to prepare you for what you were trying to actually interview your mother and your father, which seems like that's what you've been preparing for. But I wondered if you noticed, like in the stories of the couples that you interviewed in Turkey and Europe and everywhere else, if there was like a kind of line through a similar thing, or did you feel like their stories were very different according to where they lived?
Yeah, that's a good question. Whenever I meet someone who's biracial, I'm always like, how do you identify? And how do people see, there's always that conversation. And so in my experience, I found that, I typically, people that have both parents in their lives typically are like, I'm black, I'm white, like, deal with it. They're very comfortable, people I've met, in their skin, typically. My experience was that, white racism was like, I've got story upon story. Like, I had a best friend like this, and he got angry with me one day. This was in high school, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "You effing N-word." And we were like super tight, like we were like brothers, and he called me an N-word, and it hurt, and to hurt me, and it hurt, and we were never really friends again after that. And so for me, and because I didn't have my black family growing up, I typically gravitate towards black people, and I'm looking for that thing that was missing in my life. But I've met biracial people that are like, I hate black people. I prefer white people. So, and they, and the reason is in high school, the black kids made fun of them, or they had family members that made fun of them, or whatever. So it's complex, is the point. So in Turkey, people are Turkish first. Like if I say, how do you identify? They would say, I'm Turkish, and then I'm black. Where if I asked that question to someone in America, they would be like, I'm black, or, and probably I'm American would probably be fifth or sixth down the line. There's probably several things they would say before American. So in that way, it was different. I found a bunch of Sambo imagery in Turkey, which was interesting, around the tourist areas and things like that. So there's these little Sambo things all over the place, and that was kind of interesting.
I really appreciate your work. It's
thank you.
fascinating to hear the stories and just kind of how this has progressed.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, really what sparked your interest initially in art? I saw your picture as a little kid painting, but then kind of how you moved through all these different processes, obviously, to create your work, whether it was abroad or here, or you mentioned a number of residencies or grants or things like that. How did those pieces play together?
Yeah, that's not a linear story either. Unfortunately, I'm a knucklehead, and I learn everything from falling on my face or failing. So I collected comics when I was a kid, and so comic books were a huge influence when I thought I would be a comic book artist. I happened to have these wonderful World of Disney encyclopedias when I was a kid. And that was my first interaction with art. There was a section on the Renaissance, and I remember just looking at that a lot. Michelangelo, Leonardo, Raphael. And that was really my first exposure to art. I didn't have any artists in my network. I didn't even know you could be an artist. So, but I was always drawing a lot. I just drew as a pastime, just for fun. And so I went to college for civil engineering and dropped out and hated it. And so then I had to do some soul searching about what is it that I see myself doing for the rest of my life. And so art was the answer. When I decided to become to follow that path, I knew I wanted to be a painter. I knew I wanted to be an oil painter. I knew I wanted to be a figurative oil painter because of those wonderful World of Disney books. And after that, it was just really good mentors. I've had at least 3 occasions, if not more, of looking myself in the mirror saying, do you really want to do this? And so far it's been yes. And really, the reason I'm here is because of just really good mentors.
You said yes.
Yeah. But it's mentorship. Yeah. So. All right.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Our last Grant Wood Fellows lecture is going to be in April.
Thanks for coming, everyone.